I previously shared a video detailing the whole process of how I got an 80 in my dissertation. The focus in that video is all of my different study techniques that I used to get an 80, from my note-taking habits to how I read and conducted research. In this video today, I want to focus specifically on how I structured my essay and how I actually wrote it. I wrote almost 10 drafts of my dissertation before I wrote the final one, so I want to share with you exactly the process I went through to write the final dissertation, to give you ideas on how you can structure your essay and how to organise your research to make it useful when structuring it, how to develop your argument, and how to present your findings in a way that's clear and readable. Just a quick disclaimer that what works for me might not work for you. I'm showing my method because I hope that it can be helpful for you, to give you ideas or suggestions. It's not a formula to do well. Before I get into the video, I want to give some more context on my dissertation so you can better understand my methods. I did a law degree, so I did a legal dissertation. My dissertation was on IP law. It had 3 chapters as well as an introduction and a conclusion. The purpose of my dissertation was about IP law today and finding a justification for it. Each of my 3 chapters focused on a different aspect of a justification for IP, and my overall argument was for finding a new justification, and I proposed a new one. So chapter 1 was about previous theories of IP law and previous justifications, and chapters 2 and 3 presented my research. My first piece of advice for you would be to just start writing. This way you can get the worst writing done and out of the way as quickly as possible. For me, I started writing after doing just 1 reading, and this was not my final draft. This was just me trying to summarise and understand the reading that I had just done and putting it into my own words. This was useless and I would not submit it, but it was really helpful as an exercise to just develop my understanding of the main readings that I would be using in my dissertation, writing it into my own words and trying to analyse it. The pros of this method is for you to get over your fear of starting writing and to try and stop procrastination, because then writing becomes less intimidating and more natural if you just start writing anything at an earlier stage. But the cons of this are of course just falling into the trap of writing to a poorer quality when you've not conducted enough research to actually write your dissertation yet, and then forget what the mark scheme actually wants, which is analysis and a strong argument, and instead just writing a lit review based on describing what you've already read. It may also feel like a waste of time if you've not completed enough research and you want to spend more time researching rather than just writing. I definitely fell into the trap of writing more of a lit review in the first few drafts of my dissertation. I'm so glad that I did those drafts so that it helped me to understand my readings better and then form my argument, so my actual dissertation had analysis in it and an argument. So I would say just to start writing, even though it might not be used in your final dissertation draft, it's so helpful for you to process all of your research and to start thinking how you would actually want to use it, if at all, in your actual dissertation. Secondly, I would say that you will probably start writing your final draft or your actual draft of your dissertation much later than you intend to originally. This is because you need to do a lot of research to even understand the area of law, the area that your dissertation is in, let alone research all the niche areas that your argument focuses on. For example, I started writing my dissertation about 2 months before the actual deadline of my dissertation, which may seem far too close to deadline, but like I said, at this point I already had about 5 drafts of a dissertation that I'd already written, but this was more just descriptive based on the readings I've read and me trying to figure out the structure of my essay and to further develop my argument. 2 of those drafts I did hand in, and I'm sure my advisor would agree with me that they were absolutely horrendous and they would not have performed well if they were my final draft. But like I said, this was good for me because it really helped me to think how I wanted to frame my argument. You may find it frustrating if perhaps your law school or your university have deadlines where you have to submit different parts of your dissertation before the deadline just for feedback. I always felt like I needed to submit the proper thing, but looking back now, it was more of an opportunity for me to share my ideas with my advisor and discuss them. So I'd say to use these as an opportunity to just share your ideas and understand what your advisor, who will likely be marking your dissertation, wants to see in the final draft. So don't be put off if you do end up starting writing later than you thought you would do. So how can you actually format your essay? I briefly spoke in my last video about research and how to organise it. Now I'm going to go into more detail on how I used my research and turned it into my dissertation. So when you're doing your readings, you'll probably have pages and pages of notes of you summarising what you've read, noting down important pages, and writing how you want to use it in your dissertation. But research can take months, so something that you read 3 months ago, you might have completely forgotten by the time you want to think about structuring your essay and your argument. I would say to use an Excel reading tracker. This way you can record all of your readings in a way that's so accessible for you in the future. I didn't even start doing this until about 3 months before my dissertation deadline. So what I mean by a reading tracker is you write down the citations of all of your different readings, and then on the side you write down different themes. So for me, my dissertation was on IP law, and the themes that I wrote down were things like copyright and patents, whether the readings spoke about those specifically. and then different justifications for IP law, and if the readings touched on those. The tracker will likely have a lot of blank boxes because not every reading will cover every single theme. Again, it helps you to process what you've read because you can simplify an entire reading that's maybe 40 or 50 pages long into 1 to 2 sentences on Excel. So it's really easy when you do come to structuring your dissertation in the future, you can just read a quick summary of your understanding of it. To make it even more helpful, you can also do what I did, which was to colour the boxes either in red or green, depending on if I actually agreed with the reading, and then you remember for the future whether it supports your argument or if you disagree with it. I did this as a later point because I did struggle to find my own argument and to know how to structure my essay. So me doing this 3 months before my dissertation, at the time it did feel quite stressful because I wanted to be writing. Actually, this was the best way for me to start writing because it was a way for me to really condense all of my readings that I'd done over the past 6 months and actually think about how to turn those into an essay rather than just skipping the whole process of thinking about how to structure my essay and just writing because everyone else was writing and I felt like I was really behind. So taking the time to condense your readings, turn them into a tracker and sort them into different themes based on your dissertation topic, or if you know your argument at the time, different parts of your argument, that will be so beneficial for you when you do start to think about chapters and your structure. When you do start to think about how you want to structure your essay, you can look at which themes have the most boxes filled in, meaning how many readings you have which are relevant to a particular theme. So you can ask yourself which themes have the most readings and have enough content to form a chapter. You can also ask yourself which themes directly relate to my argument that I absolutely must discuss in my dissertation for it to make sense. Once I did this, there were 3 clear themes that I identified that turned into my 3 chapters. Well, there were 4 themes, but 2 of them went into 1 chapter, and another theme that I thought I wanted to write about, I didn't really have enough content about, and I wanted to go into more detail on the other themes rather than just writing more but in less detail. If you're enjoying this video so far, don't forget to subscribe. So once you've completed your research, as I discussed in my previous video, and you've turned it into your Excel reading tracker, and you've started thinking about how you want to structure it and how many chapters you'll have, you can now think about how you want to structure your entire paper based around your argument. Structuring your dissertation around your argument sounds obvious, but it's your paper, so you have to own it. This means writing in a way that makes sense for your argument and for your reader to understand it better. In my dissertation, because I was proposing my own justification, it made sense for me to write it in 3 parts rather than chapters. So they were called Part A, Part B, and Part C. Using subheadings and chapters or parts makes your dissertation as clear as possible for your reader, so before they even start reading it, when they read the contents page, they can see your structure exactly and see how you're going to develop your argument. You can use your introduction to give context to your argument and your dissertation, like defining any key terms and outlining or summarising the area of law that you're focusing on by giving it a background and an overview before going into more detail, and then proposing your argument. You can then say how you're going to prove your argument or why other arguments are wrong based on your dissertation. In your introduction, you can also summarise the purpose of each chapter of your dissertation in different paragraphs and say how you're going to develop them and how they'll prove your overall argument. You must say the order of your dissertation in the introduction to make it as clear as possible to the reader and signpost your argument so they know exactly what to expect. I found the introduction was the easiest part. It was a way for me to take control of the narrative of my dissertation. It was also a way for me to say why I'm not discussing a certain part of IP law. 10,000 words sounds like a lot, but when you're discussing a certain area of law, it's actually not that much. I only spoke about copyright and patents in my dissertation and not trademarks or other types of IP, and I made that clear in an introduction that I was only talking about 2 types of IP. For the sake of my word count, basically, I wasn't talking about another type of IP, and that meant I was just covering myself if the reader thought my argument lacked depth by leaving out trademarks. If you're focusing on a really specific area of law, but it might not be obvious why you're leaving out a different part of that area of law, then just say it to the reader and then you're backing yourself up. And speak to your advisor too if they think you should do the same. I actually found the conclusion to be the hardest part to write, and I left that until about 2 weeks before the deadline to write because I wanted to finish the rest of my paper first so I actually knew what I was concluding. I used it to summarise my entire argument, but also to propose the next steps. It's not enough in a conclusion just to summarise what you've already said, as you'll naturally be doing that at the end of each chapter, which I'll come to soon. It's good to leave your reader with an action step that needs to be taken so that they can think about the impact of your argument in your dissertation. So like I said, I was proposing a new justification for IP law, and I was proposing in my conclusion that further research needs to be done. You could also consider doing something similar yourself by proposing any next steps that need to be taken that you've identified based on your research. It just shows that you're thinking about your area of law or your topic and its impact. Everyone has different approaches to their conclusion, or some people may not write a conclusion at all depending on your dissertation. Again, this is something that you should maybe speak to to with your advisor, as sometimes it is personal preference. I just felt like I needed to tie up all of my chapters and pull them together again at the end, and then propose the next steps based on my dissertation so that it felt relevant. Now, structuring chapters to build your argument. Like I said earlier, your chapters will be based on the key themes inside of your argument. When thinking about the structure of your chapters, think about how they will develop your argument, and if one of them makes sense to be first because it talks about what already exists, and if one of them focuses more on your opinion and analysis, that one maybe makes sense going last. So the structure of your chapters really does depend on your argument, and of course you can always swap the structure around later with a simple copy and paste. My chapters were structured into part A, B and C. There was a clear purpose for each of my parts. You should write the purpose of your chapter in a 3 to 4 sentence summary at the start of it to make it clear to the reader why the chapter exists and why it's relevant. You can then use subheadings to guide the reader throughout your chapter to see how the argument develops and different parts of it, and to help signpost it. But don't just rely on subheadings. In every first introduction paragraph under a heading or a subheading, give even just a sentence introducing the purpose of it and why it's relevant. Make sure each section you write is clear, and then under each subheading and heading you can use the next few pages to go into detail on why your argument is correct, using all of your research. You can challenge your argument using the readings that you coloured red that you disagree with, analyse, make sure you conclude each chapter too, to summarise what you've discussed, link back to your overall thesis or argument, and then link to your next chapter. This just makes sure that your argument reads as a whole and it's not just 3 separate arguments and it's not clear how they relate to each other. By making sure that you always relate each chapter and subsection to each other, it makes your argument completely intertwined, and it's easy for the reader to read your dissertation and understand your argument and how you've reached your conclusion. And how to structure each paragraph. Think back to Peel paragraphs that you learnt about during your GCSEs. Point, evidence, explain and link. Every single paragraph in your chapters must be relevant. I would also say that each paragraph should follow that structure unless you have a really long point that needs 2 paragraphs, because it makes sure that everything you write is readable and relevant. It means that you have a point to each paragraph that you want to prove. You then show your research by using evidence, using citations, quotes. You then explain, which shows your analysis and understanding of it, testing the strength of the research, maybe comparing 2 different ideas together in one paragraph by different authors, and then relates to your dissertation, your argument. I followed this structure quite strictly. I found that it was the easiest way for me to meet the mark scheme, but also make my dissertation readable to the marker. It was also really helpful when condensing all of my research together. And you don't have to use an entire reading in one paragraph. You can even just use certain aspects of a reading, like just 1 out of 3 arguments that an author proposed. Just make sure you're not just describing what other people have written. Make sure when you introduce the point that you're making, it's about your dissertation and your research, not the research itself. You can also do this in the explain part of the paragraph by explaining why the research is relevant, how it's relevant to your argument, what it means, and finally, the sentence structure. Use plain and simple English language. Don't feel the need to use fancy adjectives or verbs or overly complex clauses just because you're writing a dissertation. My advisor wanted me to write as simply as possible because she was going to be marking it, and she did not want to be using a dictionary to try to understand any overly complicated language, because it doesn't make your dissertation any better necessarily by using overly complicated language and sentence structures. In fact, it makes it more difficult to read and less comprehensible, which is not what you want. You want your dissertation to be understood clearly. So make your sentences as clear as possible, and every sentence must have a point. Don't use any filler sentences. Make them direct and clear, and like I said, use sentences to also signpost your argument throughout. It may feel like you're going over the top by saying this section will discuss this part of my argument, and then once you've discussed that, you then summarise what you've already said. It may feel a bit silly and excessive, but to you, your dissertation, you will probably know the dissertation like the back of your hand, but for your advisor, it may be the first or second time they've actually read it, so you need to make it as clear as possible for them. So overall, that's how I structured my essay, how I broke it down from the entire paper to structuring the different parts, to building my paragraphs, and finally how I wrote my sentences. Let me know if you have any more questions down below, and I'll be happy to reply to them all. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please don't forget to like it. Bye!